Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Very Cold Lasagna Podcast. I'm your host, Dylan Lasagna, bringing you all the filthy casual takes on the world of sports for you sports fans out there like you and me. This is episode number 336, and in this episode, we're here to continue our 2025 NFL season team recaps. This is part number 2. We started our team recaps in the previous episode where we talked about the absolute worst of the worst, the basura teams from this past year. Those teams were the Las Vegas Raiders, the New York Jets, the Arizona Cardinals, the New York Giants, the Tennessee Titans, and the Cleveland Browns, aka the Skid Marks. So we already talked about the worst of the worst. Those were the 6 teams that we talked about, and we're here to talk about 6 more teams, which I like to call the disaster class. They weren't exactly bad, but those team seasons went absolutely downhill as the season rolled along. So yeah, it was a disaster season for those 6 teams that we're gonna be talking about here in this episode. So that being said, before we get started, if you're new here, make sure to hit the subscribe button, hit the follow button, whichever podcast platform you're listening on, whether it be on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and especially YouTube. Hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, turn on the notifications, leave a comment on your takes here in this episode, and follow me on socials on Twitter and Instagram at Very Cold Lasagna. So let's get started with part 2 of our 2025 NFL team recaps. And in case you missed the first part of our team recaps, which by the way, go check it out after this episode. How we do it here is that we divide each part from the worst to the best teams. And we have 31 teams to talk about in each part. We've already talked about one in a dedicated episode a month back. That was my San Francisco 49ers. And in each part, we talk about 6 teams each per episode, where we talk about what went right and what went wrong for all 31 teams this past season. A look at what's going on in the offseason currently, as what's the most up to date as of this each recording, and what I personally feel each team needs to do to at least try and get better and at least try to have a better upcoming 2026 season. So yeah, as it stands right now, there have been no current updates for the next set of teams that we're going to be talking about, nor the past teams that are that I've talked about in the last episode, as the NFL scouting combine is ongoing. So that's good for our part. But that being said, let's get into the next batch of teams that we're going to be talking about in this episode. And as I said, it's a set of teams that have had some expectations going to the season, more than half of them with playoff aspirations, and went up in smoke. So let's get into part 2 of our 2025 NFL season team recaps. So let's begin part 2 in the nation's capital as we talk about the Washington Commanders. Yeah, you didn't expect me to begin here, here in the nation's capital, talking about Washington, because, well, they were coming off an overachieving season in 2024, where you saw Jaden Daniels having an outstanding rookie season, and they reached the NFC Championship game surprisingly. You didn't expect them to reach that point, but they fell to the eventual Super Bowl 59 champion Philadelphia Eagles, their division rivals. But still, despite reaching that point, even in defeat, not a great defeat by any means, many, including myself, thought the future was bright in the nation's capital, and they had chances of another playoff berth if they can build on several aspects. They needed, in this point in time, last offseason, they needed to address their charming ultra soft secondary, which was a very big weakness that got exposed big time as the season progressed. But unfortunately, outside of drafting Ole Mrs. Trey Amos, they really didn't do all that much. And that made for a big preseason question mark alongside a questionable front 7, which, by the way, we'll get into quite a bit. General Manager Adam Peters did add help around Jaden Daniels by making a few trades, like for the top left tackle, Laremy Tunsil of the Houston Texans, and for receiver Deebo Samuel of my 49ers to help out the offensive line and a receiving game that didn't really have another top receiver other than Terry McLaurin, who, by the way, yeah, he and the Commanders were at a standstill with some contract negotiations. So even with the somewhat lack of activity from this team, my preseason belief was that the Commanders were going to be in contention as long as Jayden Daniels once again played well. You had an NFC East that was going to be heralded by the defending champions at the time, Eagles. Obviously, you still had the Cowboys lurking around, but the Commanders were getting up there. They were a team on the rise, at least going into this past season. Unfortunately, for this team, about that. Injury mania. What you gotta do, brother? When injury mania was gonna run wild on the nation's capital, brother. Yeah, it certainly ran wild in the nation's capital. So yeah, it took a toll on this team throughout the season for the likes of Terry McLaurin. He would go in and out of games with the quad injury. And some of this, yes, can be attributed to the improper conditioning. Again, I mean, I'm no athlete. He was in it. He didn't have like a lot of time to prepare for the season because I think he was holding out, from what I remember correctly, because of his contract disputes for an extension that ended just before the season started. And then the offensive line would rotate in and out with nearly all of them shuffling with injuries. Austin Eckler, the running back, was gone in week 2 with a torn ACL, and so was Zach Ertz 3 months later in their game in Minnesota with the same injury. But perhaps the most damning victim of injury mania was Jayden Daniels, who had high expectations going into this past season. Yes, he had a bit of a regression during this point in time, and while some of it can be blamed on him, unfortunately, the injuries were also a role not just around this team, but to him. Jayden Daniels first suffered a knee and hamstring strain in Green Bay, and also in the first month plus in the season in general. But then, probably the one that I heavily criticized the most, not on him per se, it came in week 9 in Seattle when they were facing each other in prime time. The Commanders were getting their ass whooped on national television on NBC, but for some particular reason in the fourth quarter, when the game was already well out of hand, Dan Quinn kept him out there when the game was already done. They had nothing else to show for themselves. Yet Dan Quinn kept him out there in the fourth quarter. And do you remember what happened in that game? Jayden Daniels nastily, gruesomely, dislocated his elbow on a sack he never should have taken. Absolutely never should have taken. And everyone thought it was going to be a season-ending injury. But still, it was stupid of Dan Quinn to keep him in there. And I even called for his head. It should have been a fireable offense to have Dan Quinn shown the door for his malpractice, his stupidity to keep Jayden in there. It was like RG3 all over again, literally. And it was even more stupid to bring him back in week 14. Jayden Daniels surprisingly healed. I mean, good for the guy, but even when he was ready to go, healthy to play, why even have him? Why didn't they just shut him down? Why even take the risk when the Commanders were already out of playoff contention? And guess what happened? Jayden was nursing that elbow in that big ass pad, and he hurt it again. Again, Dan Quinn was trying to RG3 his ass for fuck all, and it hurt him in the end. But aside from the injuries, they had a consistently bad defense, and that was because the lack of signings on defense, it bit them hard in the ass. Even when they were somewhat healthy, because they were giving up a crap ton of short and long plays, they were leaving receivers open in space. They couldn't tackle it at all. And all that led to Dan Quinn firing his defensive coordinator, Joe Witt, at the end of the season. But given that Dan Quinn was starting to call plays too towards the end of it, that was a little sus in my opinion. But yeah, I don't recall who he ended up hiring during this offseason, but still. yeah, like you still need better personnel. You got that's something that they need to work on during this offseason. But I mean, it wasn't all doom and gloom for the Commanders. I mean, at least from a personnel wise, not really a whole lot because of injury mania running wild. But at least they ended the season on a high note. For as beat up as they were, having to trot out Josh Johnson of all quarterbacks, the journeyman QB who played with more than half the teams in the league, they managed to make Nick Sirianni's strategy of relying on his backups to get a higher seed in the playoffs. Yeah, they managed to make it backfire. For that beat up team in Washington, they actually won that game in Philly. And it ended up costing the Eagles the following week when they had to play another hospital-ass team in my San Francisco 49ers in the first round of the playoffs. So overall, when you look at this team in Washington, for a team that had playoff aspirations after a surprising season in 2024, well, that door completely slammed shut very quickly. Not just with injury mania, but honestly, looking back at it, they constructed their roster pretty badly at this point in time last year. I will still think of this season as how Dan Quinn fucked up Jaden Daniels, although I do think he also has to bulk up. I mean, I'm talking about Jaden Daniels too, to keep himself healthy long term. I mean, I'm no athlete, but still, I mean, when you look at Jaden Daniels, he's kind of a stick in my opinion. But yeah, he has to put on some muscle. Again, no athlete. I'm just saying my opinion. I mean, I'm you know. But anyway, the supporting cast around Jaden is pretty old, and on both sides of the ball, and a lot of them are getting injured, and it's time to consider some young studs. So when you look at the offseason for the Commanders, they do at least have a good amount of money to get younger. And when you look at their draft capital, they start with the 7th overall pick, 6 draft picks total. So I'd say it's little, but not too bad per se. Looking at some of their key free agents, you got Zach Ertz, Deebo Samuel, linebacker Bobby Wagner, D lineman Von Miller, and Deatrice White, and corner Jonathan Jones. So pretty old in my opinion. And honestly, given that Zach Ertz tore his ACL late in the season and the rest are very old, honestly, you can let them go if we're being honest. So looking at the needs to address for this team as a whole, the first thing I was gonna say was, that defense. You got to overhaul the whole defense. Dortz, Armstrong, and Deron Payne, they desperately need help in the front lines, especially at the Adam Peters. For some reason, released Jonathan Allen last offseason. So they need to use 2 of their draft picks or split between free agency and the draft to give them help, because they couldn't pressure the quarterback. They couldn't rush the QB into any pressure situations. Meanwhile, in the secondary, they actually released Marshawn Lattimore. And even if they were to keep him, he was going to be recovering from a torn ACL. But either way, they still need a lot of help, especially now that they got rid of Marshawn Lattimore. And all they have left is Mike Sandstrill, and he's still a very solid player, but this backfield is very bad. So they need to get a serious amount of help, and with the resources they have, they can certainly do that. And with Terry McLaurin's case, Deebo Samuel was supposed to be that guy to be his number 2, but he ended up not doing that, and now he's a free agent that will either be re-signed for cheap or they're just going to let him go. But even if he was re-signed for cheap, the Commanders honestly should look elsewhere to find a better option to help shoulder the load off of Scary Terry finally, and not continue to waste his years. Like, how much longer are you gonna have Terry McLaurin around? And then they got to find a new tight end, because, as I said, Zach Ertz coming off a torn ACL, and even if they were to keep him, he wouldn't be available right away, and he's old, 35 years old. They could try their hand with their backup John Bates and make him a starter, and who got starter reps after Zach Ertz's injury, but they got to bring in some competition too. So this was a massively disappointing season for the Commanders, and how Dan Quinn handled the whole season puts it in a mildly hot seat for him for this upcoming season. That mildly warm seat should also go to Adam Peters if he doesn't properly address everything wrong with what happened this 2025 campaign. So he has to do his dirty work in upgrading this team, especially that very bad defense. There wasn't too many expectations this past season in the big hard for the New Orleans Saints, but when you look at how they were this point in time last year, this was a very interesting one for good and bad reasons. The Saints, they fired Dennis Allen during a disastrous 2024 campaign, one of which, it was pretty bad. And then they hired former Eagles offensive coordinator Kellen Moore, who is fresh off of winning a Super Bowl with the Eagles. But then just 2 months later, boom, Derek Carr retires because of a serious shoulder injury, one which I really can't blame him for. I mean, that's his decision. But at the same time, this left NOLA with an even more problematic quarterback issue because, well, when you looked at their quarterback room with Tyler Show, Spencer Rattler, there wasn't really a quarterback that had starting potential at the time, at least when I previewed them back in July of last year. On the flip side, they were entering this past season finally having to embrace a long overdue rebuild. They were forced into that situation. So, again, no real expectations. They obviously weren't going to go for a playoff spot, even in a very weak NFC South. So this past season was all about trying to see if they can exceed at least a few expectations. So when you look at how this past season went for the New Orleans Saints, when you look at the bad side of things, obviously you look at how the quarterback situation went, at least early on. Spencer Rattler, he got the starting spot to start things off, and it didn't go well. Just like how last 2024 went, the later parts of it. Rattler was still very on and off, whether it was reckless abandon or being too safe in the passing game, and his decision making still came off as very questionable, especially in his final 3 games before he ended up getting benched. Rattler's inability to take care of the ball and finish drives, it had me wondering why it took Kellen Moore like that long, halfway through the season, to start Tyler Show. But yeah, overall, it's like Spencer Rattler getting that many chances, but it's just kind of weird. And then you look at the interior offensive line. It was very bad in all facets. I mean, sure, yeah, Tyler Show was pretty bad, but his interior offensive line did him no favors. Like center Eric McCoy was good, but he only played 7 games because of a torn bicep, while the left and right guard spots were terrible in opening up lanes for Alvin Kamara, which led to his worst season. And while some of that, yes, falls on Kamara, who only scored 1 touchdown, all before being lost for 11 games with knee and ankle injuries, the O-line did him no favors. And they also had trouble protecting both Rattler and Show inside from interior defenders in the interior pass rush. So, yeah, the interior offensive line, not great. It was not great for this Saints team. But when you look at the silver linings for this team, I'd say it's the defense. It was surprisingly good. While the interior defensive line, it was a letdown. That was like the only bad thing about this Saints team. The exterior, the edges, the duo of Cam Jordan and Chase Young, who re-signed with the team last offseason, they did well for themselves against opposing quarterbacks. And even without pass rushing help, the Saints surprisingly had a very solid defensive backfield thanks to second-year corner Kool-Aid McKinstry and rookie Quincy Riley. They formed a tough tag team cornerback group in coverage. Alontae Taylor and Justin Reed in the safety spots played well, while safety rookie Jonas Sanker filled in decently after Julian Blackmon got seriously hurt in week 1. They had a bunch of pass deflections and interceptions as well. And then going back to the quarterback position, after Spencer Rattler got benched, Kellen Moore turned to Tyler Show. I ragged his ass for looking unimpressive in his first 3 games. He was pretty indecisive and relied on the short passing game. And people were, I think some people were getting on my butt on being too hard on Tyler Show. But then each week passed by, and he started to prove me wrong with how much kind of smarter he got with his passing and how much of a connection and chemistry he began developing with Chris Olave and Devon Vale, both whom had the best production in their careers, especially Olave, who managed to stay healthy, which is very good for him. Some thought he lacked mobility, but I saw at times his willingness to run out of the pocket. He actually was a little mobile. So Tyler Show, he's showing some promise, and I take back my word on him. He actually proved me wrong in the later parts of the season when he started. So despite finishing with the same record as last season, they finished worse than this past year. But they finished at 6-11 and finishing dead last in the NFC South. The Saints ended up finishing better than I thought they would, not just record wise, but also with some things to look forward to next season. On a positive note. And that falls on how well they did in the back half of the season on offense, with Tyler Show seemingly looking like a solid starter, then proved both on himself and the supporting cast around him. Now, that doesn't mean that they should still bring in another quarterback in the event that Show experiences regression, because I think they should. The Saints in Kellen Moore's first year in this rebuild, I think it could be considered a little bit of a success, because everything that I just said ended up being a little true. They exceeded a few expectations. So now it's on them to build on that. So when you look at the offseason that is ongoing for the Saints, they're pretty much still in a really tough situation in terms of money to spend. They're still one of the teams in the league in the red in depth. They have negative $41 million in cap space. So once again, they gotta release some people, restructure some contracts. They gotta get out of that red zone area. And I'm not talking about scoring. They gotta get out of depth again. And then in terms of first round pick, they got the 8th overall pick and 8 total picks for this upcoming draft. So a good amount of draft capital. Now, looking at some of the key free agents, you got defensive lineman Cam Jordan, linebacker Demario Davis, corner Alante Taylor, and then Taysom Hill is a free agent for the first time, I believe. They're all utility player, Taysom Hill. So when you look at some of the needs that they have to address this offseason, it goes down to their core players. I said Cam Jordan, Demario Douglas, and Taysom Hill, as well as Alvin Kamara. Do you consider re-signing those 3 players, as well as restructuring or releasing Alvin Kamara? Now, those three that I mentioned are free agents, and Kamara can be cut to save some money. All of them share the theme of being up in age, but at the same time, they still bring a lot of good production. So that's something that Kellen Moore and general manager Mickey Loomis need to consider, as the Saints are still trying to rebuild and trying to make something in a very weak division, and they're trying to improve. And speaking of improvement, they got to improve that interior offensive line. You know, for as bad as their offense was for most of the year, the group wasn't too bad, at least in the exterior positions, and somewhat center before their starting one got injured. Dylan Radunes and Cesar Ruiz, they were very weak. They need to be replaced to give Tyler Show more time to throw in the pocket. And then they got to find 3 new receivers alongside Chris Olave, Devon Vale. He's a solid one. And Chris Olave managed to play every game, like I said, except for the season finale due to a blood clot. But again, going back to his concussion issues from the year prior are still a major concern. And then you have to get to the fact that Rashid Shaheed is gone in Seattle. So they need a bunch of downfield threats to help Tyler Show. as he continues to try to improve for year 2. So it's early to say that the Saints are going to be in the mix for the NFC South because there's still plenty of fixing and decisions to make, along with a bunch of decisions because they're still in the red in depth. But I'll give credit where it's due for now because, well, these Saints exceeded expectations this past year. Now it's on them to improve and develop on those expectations that they exceeded from this past year. I didn't expect, nor did we expect, to talk about this team here this early on our radar, and that is the Kansas City Chiefs. And, well, the Chiefs were coming off a season where they had an opportunity to become the first team to eat, sleep, conquer, the repeat. But they fell well short of that, one game short and Super Bowl 59, and it was the way that they did. They got their ass whooped by the Philadelphia Eagles. And yeah, the failure to three-peat and the way that they couldn't in that game, it was a big task that they had to shake off in the offseason. But for many people in Chiefs Kingdom and the many people outside of it, including media analysts, there's still optimism that they'd be back at that stage at this point in time last year and going to this past season. But at this point in time last year, the ass whooping that they got from Philadelphia in the Super Bowl, it implored them to fix both sides of the trenches, which included drafting Ohio State swing tackle Josh Simmons and defensive lineman Omar Norman Lott and Ashton Gillette. So they had to fix both sides of the trenches, which they did. And there were still preseason expectations that the Chiefs were still the favorites to represent the AFC as long as Patrick Mahomes guided the way, even if cracks were starting to form on their roster and in their dynasty. Well, unfortunately, as the season went along for the Kansas City Chiefs, yeah, those cracks were going to explode. And that's what happened on offense. And Mahomes missed on passes he usually connect on. He struggled bad against really good defenses like the Jaguars, the Broncos, and especially in that Sunday night game against the Houston Texans. But at the same time, when you look at his supporting cast, a supporting cast which he normally elevates, especially last year when they were having those very close one-score games that they would win, surprisingly, his supporting cast did him no favors here. The offensive line was one of the most penalized in the NFL, and they also got compounded with injuries. The receiving game, they could never get on the same page with Mahomes, especially in the deep threat, and that included Travis Kelce, who continued to show his age at this point in time. The run game was pretty non-existent with Isaiah Pacheco and Kareem Hunt, even when the O-line had moments of decency. So overall, this entire offense took a major step back from the last 2 years. And I guess you could say, in a nutshell, it got exposed. Meanwhile, on the defensive side, on the ball, from Steve Spagnuolo's POV, despite all the blitzes, explicit and implicit, or straight up bull rushes that were called, the front four had problems getting to the quarterback because, well, there was no help for George Karlaftis and Chris Jones, who showed, I say, a little bit of signs in decline. And Chris Jones was like getting pissed off frequently at the lack of help that his front four was not giving him. And yeah, and then meanwhile, you look at the defensive backfield, the secondary, due to the lack of a pass rush, that left opposing quarterbacks to attack what ended up being a pretty bad passing defense, who gave up a lot of big plays in the clutch, and the corners' inability to cover and tackle. They were a major contributor, again, in allowing teams to come back against the Chiefs in pretty much what was a reverse of last year when it came to the Chiefs, doing that to opposing teams. The Chiefs were on the receiving end, the bad end of that this time around. The Chiefs' defense were a major contributor in, again, allowing teams to come back against the Chiefs and pretty much undoing anything Mahomes and the offense did to build a late lead. And this time around, Mahomes and company couldn't do anything to answer back. So Steve Spagnuolo's defense took a step back too. not as big of a step back as Mahomes in the offense, but still a whole team regression. But probably the worst part about what happened this season for the Kansas City Chiefs, obviously the biggest one was the injury to Patrick Mahomes. But we'll talk about that in just a bit, because the Chiefs by week 15, by week 15, they were 6-7. They desperately needed to win that game in the rematch with the Chargers at home. They desperately needed to win that game. They were not doing that great. They were coming off a big loss to the Houston Texans a week prior. It was pretty much desperation time. They needed to get that game to at least stay in the playoff hunt. And yeah, that's pretty much that. They already lost contention to the division to Denver and to a degree to the Chargers. It was desperation time. And within the 2-minute warning, they needed to tie the game or even win the game. But then suddenly Mahomes blew out his knee right after the 2-minute warning, trying to avoid a tackle, and boom. The Chiefs not only ended up losing a key game that eliminated from playoff contention completely, but they ended up losing their starting quarterback for the rest of the season, and who knows how long going into next season. And honestly, that loss didn't end up mattering to the coaching staff, nor the players, nor the fans, because yeah, the franchise quarterback just suffered an ACL tear that late in the year. And that's brutal. Whether you're a fan of the Chiefs or not, it's not great to have. And it's not fun watching a franchise starting quarterback suffer a significant injury. It's never fun to see that. So yeah, there are major questions going into next season about whether or not Patrick Mahomes will be ready to go by week 1 or even week 2. So when you look at some things that were kind of nice for a Chiefs season that was pretty much like not going in the right direction, you at least look at Travis Kelce. Even when he was continuing to massively regress as the Chiefs eventually fell out of contention, he at least finished the season playing as hard as he possibly could, even if the stats don't show it. I mean, again, we're not really too stats centric, nor should we be here on Very Cold Lasagna, because we look at how they performed on TV, and he finished the season nearly as hard as he could, and nearly had him at third string quarterback Chris Olajuwon in position to beat the Broncos on Christmas. And it was the same Broncos team who needed to win to clinch the AFC West. So, yeah, they nearly had that game won. And Travis Kelce played probably one of his better games all season this past year. So, yeah, Travis Kelce, I'd say he gave his potentially final 2-game swan song against the Broncos, and then later in the season finale against the Raiders. They're still at this point in time, much talk of this being Kelce's final season after he elected to come back after Super Bowl 59. But if this is really the end, at least he gave his final 2 games a pretty solid effort. It's just a matter of time if whether or not Kelce is going to come back or if he's finally going to retire. And then you look at the linebacker trio of Drew Tranquill, Nick Bolton, and Chamari Connor. Even if the overall passing defense sucked, the middle of the field in both passing and running, it was still playing pretty good. Bolton and Connor forced 3 fumbles and sacks, and they stopped very receivers and runners short of the sticks on key downs, and they even made them lose yardage. So when you look at that trio, it still ended up playing pretty good. So this season for the Chiefs, it was a pretty big letdown that honestly was gonna come due for a Chiefs kingdom. That's not me being like, oh, facetious or anything, but having gone to 5 Super Bowls in the last 6 years and winning 3 of them, the bill was eventually gonna come due for a team that had serious issues in the last 2 seasons. The luck just simply ran out for them, and it ran out very hard. So they finished 6-11, and now they got plenty of work to do in making a few big changes. Like they already started with replacing Matt Nagy, who they just let his contract expire, for a reunion with Eric Bieniemy as offensive coordinator. And they hoped that whatever he did in the time that he was away, they that he brings something new to the table while he brings whatever familiar what it was when he was still with the Chiefs. And as they continue to make moves in their coaching staff. However, that's just the beginning for them in a major offseason for them. So when you look at their ongoing offseason for Kansas City, they started out with the least amount, not the least amount, the worst amount of money in any team in the NFL. They had around $57 million in negative money. $57 million in the red. That's even worse than the Saints. But they managed to get out of that hole, and I'll talk about how that was. So their first round pick started at 9th, so that's a positive of being bad throughout the season. They have 6 total draft picks for this upcoming draft. Some of the key free agents were pretty big ones. Travis Kelce being one of the biggest ones. Defensive lineman Charles Omenihu, running backs Kareem Hunt and Isaiah Pacheco. You got a receiving core, Marquise Hollywood Brown and Juju Schuster. Corner Jalen Watson and safety Byron Cook. Now looking at the needs that they have to address this upcoming offseason, obviously one of the biggest one that they had to do first of all was get out of the red. That because, like I said, they had the biggest amount of depth next to the Saints, more than the Saints, that they had to get out of. Well, as I mentioned, they already started by restructuring Mahomes' contract to create $43 million in cap space and significantly reduce that depth to $14 million a few weeks ago. And more recently, at the time of this, they released Michael Dana to add $8 million more to reduce it down to $6 million. So they still got a lot of work to do. And my opinion is that they can continue to do that by releasing offensive lineman Jawan Taylor, who really sucked since signing to Kansas City in 2023 because he's been a penalty machine. So they can free up $20 more million and get in the red. And along with doing more salary restructures, more releases, and they can start spending. And then meanwhile, looking at Travis Kelce, if he's for some reason doesn't retire and instead resigns, you have to find a successor. Kelce has been taking forever to make a retirement decision. I mean, that's fine, but he needs to know when it's eventually time to hang it up. And maybe it's an ego thing. Maybe it's a self-reflection thing. I don't know. But if the Chiefs and Kelce end up agreeing to a team-friendly deal, then they better draft a successor for Kelce to mentor for a year, because Kelce is not going to be around forever. And he's at the way as he has been playing for the last 2 to 3 years. Yeah, it has to happen at some point. And then they got to get better help around Patrick Mahomes, because the last 2 to 3 years have greatly exposed the lack of pretty much everything. This year was pretty much the explosion of a ticking time bomb. A better run game is needed. More help around Rashee Rice and Xavier Worthy is needed. Like I mentioned, Kelce's successor and better offensive linemen is pretty much all needed. Now they can't get it all this upcoming offseason, but they got to start somewhere. So the Super Bowl losers hangover curse, it finally caught up on the Kansas City Chiefs, and it brought it on very hard. It brought on a very hard, overdue reality check on them that they seriously need to retool this team. They can't just patchwork certain areas. They got to do it hard. Patrick Mahomes is already grinding back to recover from his ACL injury and try to get back for the season opener in September. But when he gets back, this team can look very different, whether it be good or pretty bad. The Cincinnati Bengals in 2024 fell just a bit short in the playoffs despite winning 5 straight. But that was because of their own doing due to a very bad defense. So at this point in time last year in the offseason, one would think that they'd use that time from what they learned in 2024 to work on that, right? Right? Nope, not at all. Well, not at all, because while they got help to counter the release of prominent edge rusher Sam Hubbard, who immediately went into retirement, in re-signing Joseph Asai, Cam Sample, and then Trey Hendrickson after a lengthy contract standoff, mind you, while drafting Shamar Stewart, but he managed to hold off pretty lengthy. There was no help in the backfield for Dax Hill and Geno Stone. Yeah, that was pretty much somewhat wasted offseason for Cincinnati. And my preseason expectations was one centered around if we were going to see the same old stuff from the season prior for Cincinnati. But at the same time, it was also one that could make head coach Zach Taylor the scapegoat. So when you look at how this past season went for the Cincinnati Bengals, it was pretty much how I expected it to go. The defense, this is the bad side, first of all. The defense, once again, was pretty dog shit. The pass rushing unit was, again, the only solid saving grace, but it was pretty undone by a consistently dog shit backfield that gave up any kind of pass due to their inability to cover or make tackles. Dax Hill once again performed well in a rebound year from the ACL tear last year, and so did Geno Stone and Jordan Battle in the deep backfield end. But then there was nobody else. There's nobody else able to do much of anything. They're frequently giving up 30 to 40 points in more than half of their games, and they even blew 2 straight leads to the Jets and the Bears prior to their bye week. So that tells you a lot about how this team was doing. And that included a certain quarterback coming back in the back half of the year. So that quarterback included Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow's turf toe injury, and that was the biggest detriment to their season, which caused Burrow to miss more than 2 games. More than 2 months because of that turf toe injury. He suffered it in week 2 against the Jacksonville Jaguars. And yeah, it was a pretty bad injury. And I argued that he shouldn't have been back at all because the Bengals were 4-8 or like 3-8 by the time they announced that Joe Burrow was going to come off return from injured reserve. And I was thinking, like, why? What's the point? It was because that Cincinnati was losing so much under Joe Flacco, who they traded for, by the way, immediately after Burrow got hurt. And I was thinking, like, why bother? Sure, they managed to shock everyone on Thanksgiving when Burrow did return, but then they face planted back to reality in Buffalo the next week. And not only that, they got shut out by those same Ravens that they beat 2 weeks ago on Thanksgiving. So what was the point of bringing back Joe Burrow? Like, really? That Ravens team that got embarrassed on Thanksgiving and that shut them out 2 weeks later, that eliminated Cincinnati from playoff contention. So again, what was the point of bringing back Joe Burrow? But at the same time, when you flip the coin, it still was a somewhat positive because the offensive play in the final 3 games of the year, you looked at how Cincy it could have been. It was like a what if had Joe Burrow not gotten injured. Joe Burrow played as well as like how he had been in the last 4 or 5 years. Precise connections to Jamar Chase, who had, despite Joe Burrow not being there, having to deal with Joe Flacco, he had a stellar 1,000-yard season. And T. Higgins, he played pretty well too. And then running back Chase Brown also continued to build on his starter status, eclipsed the 1,000-yard mark in rushing and looking pretty well in doing so too. So yeah, you saw how this offense was looking as in their last 3 games, and building on it showed you a what if scenario. But again, too bad all this came when they're already out of playoff contention. So there weren't many positives from the Cincinnati season, primarily because of what we expected. A terrible defense again, but more importantly, Joe Burrow's toe injury derailing any chance of them catching a playoff berth. So they finished 6-11, and although they even had a chance of catching the Ravens and the Steelers in the AFC North after Thanksgiving, but they blew their load in making Joe Burrow return on Thanksgiving that the whole team let down in Buffalo. And yes, that included Joe Burrow. And they got shut out in the Ravens rematch like 2 weeks later after Thanksgiving. So now you look at how Cincinnati is currently doing in the offseason. They began it early again in Cancun, but Zach Taylor's job is safe for now, which I think it's the smart move that Cincinnati has made. But now Joe Burrow's been having up and down happiness, which he has openly stated throughout the season since he's came back from that injury. And that has become another story, which will be defined again by how Cincinnati's ownership will let the front office go all out to make him happy. So when you look at how Cincinnati shapes up throughout this offseason, they're looking at $52 million in money spending. That's if the ownership will let them spend and not be like a Mr. Krabs for once. And then they have the 10th overall pick with 7 picks total, so not too shabby. Looking at some of the key free agents, you look at Trey Hendrickson, Can Sample, and Joseph Asai on the front four. So you got to make some decisions there on who to keep. And then looking at the backfield, safety Geno Stone, corner Cam Taylor-Britt. So some decisions have to be made there. And then looking at the offensive line, Dalton Risner, Lucas Patrick, and Ted Karras. So plenty of needs, and they're all of them are key needs. So yeah, a lot of key free agents that they have to figure out who to keep or delete. So looking at needs, speaking of, that they really need to address this offseason to make Joe Burrow happy, mind you. Defense. Once again, from last season, they have to address defense. Don't cheap out. Don't be a Mr. Krabs. Don't blow your load on extending Jamar Chase and T. Higgins like you did last year. I mean, it's good that they did that, but they sacrificed the defense. Now, this year, you got to go all out on the defense. If they're ever going to go back into the playoffs and go far, the front office and ownership, they have to blow their load and improve the defense. Edge rushers, interior defensive linemen, linebackers, the entire front seven, that has to be overhauled. The defensive backfield especially needs to have serious help for Dax Hill and Jordan Battle, especially if they don't re-sign Geno Stone. So this overall defensive group, they need so much more quality depth on this side of the football to help their offense, because it's been so dog shit for the last 2 to 3 seasons that they haven't been able to make the playoffs. They have undone the work that Joe Burrow and that offense has done. And speaking of the offense, they got to fix the interior offensive line. This was surprisingly not as big of a weakness that has been in the last year or so since Burrow got here. But still, Risner, Patrick, and Karras are free agents, so they have to consider who to keep or delete unless they want to go in a completely different direction. So for Cincinnati, the Bengals, once again, they have to address a lot of concerns this offseason, but the main one has to be defense. They have a lot of money to do it. They have some decent draft capital to do it. But if the ownership is going to be a Mr. Krabs again on the front office, then they could see Joe Burrow express his unhappiness again, and make it even more well known. And that'll come as soon as training camp. So the Bengals ownership, don't be a Mr. Krabs this offseason. The Miami Dolphins were coming off a wasted, injury-riddled 2024, where they somewhat were trying to make the playoffs again for some reason, but they had many concerns on the roster that they need to figure out for this past season. So at this point in time, last offseason, with them in the red due to large yet underperforming contracts and barely any draft picks, they traded away corner Jalen Ramsey to the Steelers for at least a 7th round pick, while releasing corners Kendall Fuller and running back Raheem Mostert. Well, it didn't really do all that much in the grand scheme of things. So with the resources they did have, they relied on the defense through the draft. So, but even then, this was a team that had plenty of concerns going into the regular season, and it was one of those that was once again going to be on Tua, and if they could get a fully healthy season from him for once. So when you look at this team, when it comes to the bad stuff, it was the whole defense. As expected, with Jalen Ramsey gone, the defensive backfield took a significant hit. Although Rasul Douglas and Kader Kohu, they had their moments of lockdown coverage, pass breakups, a few interceptions, but that was pretty much it. Overall, though, their coverage on opposing receivers, not that great. It was really bad. It also had to do with the front four's inability to pressure opposing quarterbacks, get some sacks, whether it was on the edge or the interior. And that got even worse when Jalen Phillips got traded to the Philadelphia Eagles at the trade deadline. And once he got traded, it was pretty much over from there, as they had no one else to pressure the quarterback other than a rookie Kenneth Grant and veteran Zach Seller. So they didn't pretty much have anything on defense, especially like in the front four. And then even though Tua managed to stay healthy all season, which is good, it was a pretty good thing that he managed to stay healthy, so no health concerns. The problem is that he still continually was inconsistent, and I mean massively inconsistent, like throwing and reading defenses well 1 week and doing the big opposite for 2 or 3 weeks. One noticeable example of that was the stretch playing the Chargers, the Browns, and then the Falcons. Like, he was doing bad in the Chargers and Browns game, and then all of a sudden, against the Falcons, he was playing pretty dang well. And then when you get to the point where the Dolphins were playing against the Steelers, they were kind of on the edge of playoff contention. But when it finally came to a hit in Week 15 against the Steelers on Monday night in the cold, where Tua still doesn't do well in, he was doing so bad. He did terrible against the Steelers. And it reached a breaking point where Mike McDaniel was like, okay, that's enough. It's time to finally bench him for an unknown, undrafted rookie in Quinn Edwards. And someone will point out that perhaps it has to do with something that's going to happen this offseason for Tua and the Dolphins. So when you look at least some of the silver linings for Miami, you look at Devon Achane, the running back. Even in a wrecked offense, he was a really good running back that powered through opposing defenses, found open gaps in tight spaces, being a physical back. He went on to have a really great career season for himself, rushing over for 1,000 yards. And his highlight of the season was leading the Dolphins to a big upset win over the Bills at home with a 174-yard, 2-touchdown game to pretty much destroy the Bills. Other than that, all the negatives led to them starting 1-6. But even with their little spark to finish 6-4 for a 7-10 record, no one on that team seemed interested or motivated during this season. That was especially true for Tua and coach Mike McDaniel, who was fired 4 days later after their blowout season finale to the Patriots. And yeah, it was not a great season for Miami. Mike McDaniel was replaced by former Packers defensive coordinator Jeff Hafley, who, interestingly enough, he closed out his tenure in Green Bay. Not great with that certain game in Chicago. But anyway, Jeff Hafley had positional jobs as a defense on the defensive side, but he does have coaching experience for the Boston College Eagles from 2020 to 2023, finishing with the 22-26 record and giving the college its first college football bowl win since 2007 in his last season. So, yeah, it's not to say that Jeff Hafley is an inexperienced positional coach, but hey, he does have some head coaching experience. So again, Jeff Hafley was a mixed bag in Green Bay, even this past season when his defensive backfield regressed throughout the year. As I mentioned, look at that playoff game this past year against the Bears. So joining him from Green Bay is Vice President of Player Personnel, John Eric Sullivan, replacing Chris Grier, who parted ways with the Dolphins midseason as the new general manager. So this new head coach GM duo they've already have some big decisions for both the team's short-term and long-term future during this offseason. So when you look at this offseason for the Dolphins, they're not. It's not great. It's not great. When they first started out, they were around $24 million in debt in the red. That was after the season ended, but they managed to put themselves back in the green, which is good, but not by much. It's still very low, $2 million. So they gotta still make some moves. And that was by releasing Tyreek Hill, who was injured early in the season with the very bad leg injury. They also released Bradley Chubb, Nick Westbrook-Akine, and O-lineman James Daniel a couple weeks ago. That freed up over $56 million in spending money. But still, it puts them at $96 million in dead cap money for this offseason. So, yeah. For all the money that they got in spending, that's still $96 million in wasted revenue. So their first round pick is 11th overall with 8 total draft picks in 2 months time. So pretty decent amount. Looking at some of their key free agents, the ones of concern are Rasul Douglas and Kader Kohu at corner, but everyone else is okay. Like Darren Waller at tight end and kicker Riley Patterson. And looking at the needs that they have to address this offseason, it starts at quarterback. They got to decide on whether they want to trade or release Tua Tagovailoa, or at the very least, find a new quarterback that'll eventually supplant him. This situation is very tricky for the Miami Dolphins. Now, Tua has stayed healthy all season, but the new regime is going to likely question about his inconsistency too, along with his past health issues with the concussions. The thing with, like I said, with this being tricky is neither trading nor releasing him is it's not going to be easy, because he carries almost a very hefty $100 million dead money charge. That's not good for Miami. They're going to owe Tua a bunch of money, and that, I don't know how they're gonna spread that out. So that's a very hefty charge for the Dolphins, and even a quarterback needy team may not be willing to trade for a quarterback that can't stay healthy nor has those consistency problems. So if they don't trade or release him, they should at least look into finding a stopgap, because a franchise one is not going to be in this year's free agency or draft class. So they got a big issue at quarterback on their hands. So on the other side of things, they have to find some depth at receiver, because after releasing Tyreek Hill, he carried a $50 million cap charge going to next season had they keep him, but they managed to release him. So they got about $22 million back in spending money, but they also released Nick Westbrook-Akine. So now they got to add a lot more quality depth behind Jalen Waddle, because that's all they have left. Then they also have to fix the offensive line because center Aaron Brewer, he got no help in the interior, which contributed to Tua's really bad play in the pocket. That's not to say that Tua had his own problems, but at the same time, Austin Jackson and Patrick Paul weren't that great on the outside either. But the Dolphins are strapped at resources, so they probably need to focus on getting Brewer help. So looking at the Miami Dolphins, they were an inept, disinterested team this entire past year, yet they somehow finished where they were, 7-10. Still, this new regime of Jeff Hafley and John Eric Sullivan have to pick up the scraps. They got to make this a interesting, more organized, and somewhat happy roster again than the previous one left behind. They got off to a decent start on that, but they still have the Tua question that's going to be hard to address in the next coming weeks and month. Jerry World suffered an injury-plagued 2024, which included losing Dak Prescott, and that derailed the postseason hopes for the Dallas Cowboys, despite their best efforts to stay in it. And Jerry Jones looked to ensure a rebound season for this past year. I'm not sure if he decided to continue going all in. Yeah, remember that all in phrase that he used back in 2024? it didn't pan out. But anyways, when you look at this point in time, last offseason, in February of last year, Jerry Jones let Mike McCarthy's coaching contract expire. He let him go, and he replaced him with one that caught people off guard. He did an internal hire with offensive coordinator Brian Schottenheimer and made him the new head coach. At the time, some people were really calling it a questionable in-house move, given that he interviewed more qualified candidates like Robert Saleh, Kellen Moore, all those guys. But when I previewed this team back in July, I took a wait and see approach with him. I kind of questioned it, but I was willing to give it a chance. But the bigger preseason story for this team was all the trades that Jerry Jones made, including the big ones like the Steelers receiver, George Pickens coming over. But the biggest one that they did was right before the season started, trading away starred edge rusher Micah Parsons to the Green Bay Packers. So that ended up being the biggest storyline going right into the season for a team that was trying to compete with the then defending Super Bowl champion Eagles and a then surging Washington Commanders at the time. Jerry Jones didn't really do his team much favors by trading away his best defensive piece for a unit that had a lot of young studs. So when you look at this team, I mean, when you look at the good side of things first, I mean, the offense, it improved at least. Dak Prescott had one of his best seasons coming off that bad hamstring injury. He had some of his best games in a bounce back season. The addition of George Pickens, who had a career high year and looked very much more motivated than he did with the Steelers in his later years. He looked very much more motivated as the season went on and performed well in deep ball situations, greatly helping Prescott. And it took some of the load off of CeeDee Lamb, who also had another big year against defenses. When you look at the passing attack overall, it was very improved under Brian Schottenheimer and offensive coordinator Clayton Adams. The offensive line, except for Tyler Guyton, improved, and that greatly helped free agent running back Javonte Williams, who also had a career best rushing year, and he managed to stay healthy too. But when you look at all that, it was pretty much undone by the entire defense, and it was pretty much impacted by the trade of Micah Parsons. The whole defense was the sole reason why Dak Prescott and the offense either had to keep scoring points to win or why the team lost games. Actually, it was a combination of both. The unit coordinated by former Bears head coach Matt Eberflus, or Matt Eberflus, whatever you want to use it. He flushed down a shit ton of open big yards, plays weekly because not a single player could stay on their assigned receiver or covered their assigned receiver. Deron Bland, he was the only reliable guy in that defense, but unfortunately, he still couldn't stay healthy. The front seven wasn't any better because, well, without Micah Parsons there, they couldn't stop the run nor pressure opposing quarterbacks because of the loss of Parsons. And, well, they got a little bit better, but not by much when they traded for Bengals linebacker Logan Wilson and then Jets defensive lineman Quinnen Williams, as well as getting back edge rusher DeMarvion Overshown from the torn ACL. But Overshown, he had a very quiet second half because, well, he was coming off the ACL. But even with those three moves, those three additions, it still really didn't help out the defense. So for the Cowboys, the season was basically over right before it began. And it all started with the trade the trade away of Micah Parsons. And honestly, you can't blame Brian Schottenheimer for this because he actually did a surprisingly solid job in his first coaching year. He could only control what he could do because his defense coordinator Eberflushed his offense's best efforts to win games that they could have won. Dak had a good rebound year alongside the rest of the offense, but again, it was undone by a horrid defense. Schottenheimer promptly fired and replaced Matt Eberflus with former Broncos and Eagles defensive coordinator the backs coach Christian Parker as the new defensive coordinator. And Cowboys fans can hope he could turn that defense around with another wasted season finished at 7-9-1. And yeah, that one being that tie, that shootout tie with the Green Bay Packers in week 4, which, by the way, was the one where Micah Parsons returned as a Packer. Jerry Jones, he's got to figure out how to fix things with this team. And boy, is there a lot to do because of his fuck up. So looking at how things shape up for the Cowboys in this offseason, well, it all starts with them getting out of debt. They got $31 million in debt in the red that, well, they got to, Jerry Jones once again has to figure out, well, how do I get my team out of debt? But the good thing about the Cowboys in this upcoming draft, they have 2 draft picks in the first round. They have their regular pick at number 12, and then they got the 20th overall pick from the Green Bay Packers with that Micah Parsons trade. So they have 8 picks total in this upcoming draft. Looking at some of their key free agents, probably one of the biggest ones, 2 biggest ones, is kicker Brandon Aubrey and George Pickens. So they have decisions to make there. And then other ones include linebackers Kenneth Murray and Jadeveon Clowney. So, like I said, going back to Aubrey and Pickens, they obviously got to re-sign them. Aubrey is one of the NFL's best kickers since he has emerged a few years ago. So, Jerry Jones got to reward him with a nice deal, and that should be a must. I don't know if rewarding him with a $10 million per year contract, though, is the right way to go, though. As for George Pickens, this is more difficult because he's likely to command a lot of money after a big rebound year. Dallas is expected to use the franchise tag on him, but it's not only going to be costly, but Pickens is unlikely going to play under that franchise tag. And then one of the other biggest things is, just like with the Cincinnati Bengals, defense. That entire unit needs a complete overhaul. After the atrocity that we've seen this past season, even with the new defensive coordinator, they need to fix this defense because after they lost Micah Parsons, just one player that they lost, it turned into crap. Pass rushers are sorely needed to make up for losing Parsons, and DeMarvion Overshown, he had to get back to full strength from the ACL tear in his rookie year. So they need more help on the pass rush, and also to support Quinn Williams, their new addition. They also need to get help in the secondary because they don't have quality corners, reliable ones at that, because Deron Bland can't stay healthy. And the same thing at the safety spot. Meanwhile, on offense, they managed to re-sign Javonte Williams, which, he did really well this past season, and he was rewarded as such with a new 3-year deal. But, at the same time, Jerry Jones should still sign or draft another back to complement him, to help him out in the event that something happens to him or he regresses, something like that to help him out. So when you look at the Cowboys this past season, Brian Schottenheimer's first season was not as bad as outsiders had expected, which was good, I guess, because, I gave him a chance and he didn't do too bad. But yeah, it was still pretty much a waste because of all the talk I said about their defense. And if Jerry Jones doesn't focus on that this offseason, then 2026 is going to be much more of the same. And that is a wrap on part 2 of our 2025 NFL season team recaps and the disaster seasons that these 6 teams have occurred. And those teams were the Washington Commanders, the New Orleans Saints, the Dallas Cowboys, the Miami Dolphins, the Cincinnati Bengals, and especially the surprise one, the Kansas City Chiefs. So, if you're a fan of these teams, let me know how they did or didn't do, in your opinion, in the comments on YouTube, or send me a message on my socials at Very Cold Lasagna, and what they need to do for this upcoming offseason, the current offseason, to improve for next year. So, let's have a conversation about it in the comments below and on YouTube, and in a message on my socials. And as we continue to roll along in this offseason. But that is it for this episode of the Very Cold Lasagna Podcast. I've been your host, Dylan Lasagna, bringing you all the filthy casual takes on the world of sports for you sports fans out there like you and me. So we're going to continue along with our team recaps for part 3. You'll just have to figure out what those next set of teams will be. But yeah, we've done 12 teams so far. The absolute worst and the teams that had disaster seasons, the downfall teams. But yeah, make them for what you will as they go on their journey to try and improve. But anyway, until the next one, until we are back to discuss the next set of teams in the next one, peace out.